Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the fact that progressive overload, once you are not a novice, is no longer a weekly thing. Not only that, but it's not even necessary to make gains. Okay, it just isn't. Not on a weekly basis. It needs to be over time. And this is what people fail to understand, is because you have way too many people out here who only know how to coach novices. They teach novices. They know nothing about intermediates. They absolutely know nothing about coaching advanced lifters, and they sure as hell don't know anything about coaching elite lifters. And so they tend to tell you that, oh yeah, if we're not progressively overloading, then we're not going to stimulate any muscle growth. And that's just simply not true. And I'm not saying progressive overload doesn't matter, because we know it does. What I'm saying is it shouldn't be measurable on a weekly basis, other than with new exercises in which you've detrained uh, once you're out of the novice phase, and particularly not for advanced. And here's the other problem. People will do this and they'll say, okay, well, if you can't add weight to the bar, then you need to be adding reps or sets. And it's like, no, you can't always do that. There's no guarantee of that. And here's what I mean. We're looking at progressive overload plotted over time. In other words, when you've reached a decent amount of muscle mass, unless you start up in the dose, bro, you're not going to see quick gains on your rep work. You might see some of your maxes hit PRs if your programming is good, right? You'll see maxes hitting PRs, particularly for rotating through maxes. But you're not going to see, say, your 10 rep sets always progress. Okay, you're just not. You might be looking at, hey, about every 4 to 6 weeks, can I get a little stronger on them? And if you're wanting continual progression on them, you're going to have to continually rotate exercises. Like if you're detrained on a movement, let's say you have 3 different exercises you like to run for a given muscle or a given training slot. All right, when you add one back in, you're going to have a week of detraining to make up for. You can see a big burst in the first week as far as the weight you put on the bar. Then you're going to get a little more, then it's going to stall. So if you want to see continual progress, what do we need to do? Well, change that lift every 3 weeks. And you can do it that way, but understand that the new training stimulus is coming from the fact that you rotated the lift. And that's not actually a bad way to do things. So I don't want people to hear me say that and say, but that's why you're seeing it, to say that it doesn't work, because it is a viable method. Change that training slot every 3 weeks. It could be changing from a barbell to a dumbbell. It could be changing your grip spacing, something like that. Changing your stance width. You can do a lot of things like that to rotate this stuff around. Okay, and that can be done. But if you're going to stick with the same exercise in a slot for a while, you have to expect the fact that it's not going to progress very quickly, because we're gaining very, very small amounts of muscle. And what's mostly what makes our 10 rep sets go up? Hypertrophy. Well, if we're gaining muscle at such a slow pace that we can't add more than microplates to the bar, which could be a viable method. You could do half-pound increments on a barbell movement and add it every single session possibly. Yeah, that might be doable as long as you're not quite hitting failure. Sure, you could do that, but you've got a micro load. You're not going to be adding 5 pounds. You might be adding half a pound. And then we look at that and say, well, what does that add up to over, 10 weeks is 5 pounds? Well, on an upright row or a closed grip bench or JM press or whatever you're looking at, that's actually pretty good. That might be an option, sure. But you'd get the same effect if you just waited the 10 weeks to add 5 pounds. Meaning you could, every month try to add 2.5. You could do that, or every 5 or 6 weeks, you could try that. And as long as we're getting the same reasonably close to failure, you're still stimulating growth. So the question you've got to ask if you're stalling for too long is, it's not because you aren't progressively overloading the bar weight. It's because you're not stimulating muscle growth, or you're training too much, or you're under recovering. You're not eating enough to gain muscle. Maybe you're not sleeping enough. That's the cause. Okay, because if you're getting about 1 rep from failure and you can't get any more progress, well, that's just because you're not gaining enough muscle to see that progress. In which case, like I said, it might be time to reassess those other things going on. Okay, particularly if it's all your lifts. But I would also say to people, say, well, when I'm cutting, slow cutting, that happens to me. It's like, okay, well then you need to reassess. If you want to gain strength and muscle, then you need to stop cutting. And people say, but I want to lose the body. I want to do this. Well, pick one. You can't have both. If you're choosing to be in a weight loss phase as an advanced lifter, you're cutting body fat, you're cutting body weight, you've already made the compromise to say, I am not going to eat enough to gain muscle. Well, short of drugs, there's nothing else you're going to do about that until you decide to finish cutting and say, okay, I'm done with this cut. In which case you can go back to eating more and making progress. But do you see the problem there? You know, people have this assumption that they can take the factors away that's going to cause muscle growth and they're going to see progress. Well, not eating enough. You're losing body weight and you're not a novice lifter, you're probably not going to be getting significantly stronger. You might be lucky to even keep all of it that you have. But that comes back over to the eating enough because you've made a conscious choice to pursue another goal. And that's okay, but you can't serve two masters. You know, you're not sleeping enough. Well, then fix it. You kind of come back over to, well, I can't get my life structured in such a way to get 8+ hours of sleep. Okay, and then don't cry if you're not getting stronger or gaining muscle. You are choosing whatever it is in your life that's preventing that. It's some choice you've made. Work on your sleep hygiene. Free up some of your time to get more sleep in. And if you can't, then you've got other priorities besides gaining muscle and strength, and that's okay. Understand that that's where your priorities are. Maybe it's something really important in your life. Okay then. But then don't get upset. So the thing to remember here, though, is that when all these factors are constant, still progression is going to be slow. It's going to be very, very slow. And realistically, on exercises that you're already established on, when you're not a novice anymore, you simply cannot expect to see literal week-to-week improvement. Whether we're talking about adding weight to the bar or talking about adding reps. Okay? It's just going to take time to be able to do those. And again, as long as your training loads are sufficient and you're getting a good training response, it's okay that you're not progressively overloading for a short period of time. As long as you know that you're pushing hard enough with the correct volumes and recovery to gain muscle. And then once you gain muscle, you'll find you can go up a little bit. But it's kind of the case of until you've adapted to that workload enough to get stronger through gaining muscle mass, it's not going to progress. You know, it's kind of the case of which came first, the chicken or the egg. In this case, usually the hypertrophy itself is ahead of the progressive overload, unless you started really, really light. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.